Composer, educator, and writer David Baker is being remembered for his dedication to jazz music. As Sarah Whitmire reports, Baker died Saturday in Bloomington, Indiana, where he taught for nearly half a century.
There goes the neighborhood.
David Baker didn't come from a musical family, but he was certainly a product of his environment.
That people tend to excel in the areas which are open to them, so that at that time a black was expected to play religious music, rhythm and blues, rock and roll, or jazz.
Born December 21, 1931, David Baker grew up in Indianapolis when it was heavily segregated. He and all of his friends went to the all-black Crispus Attucks High School. It was a close-knit community, not just inside the school, but also in the neighborhoods where black families were concentrated at the time.
And so Indiana Avenue kind of became a focal point for cultural activity, particularly of activity of the sort of jazz and music, and I suppose art and poetry, much like what would have been happening in Harlem with the Harlem Renaissance.
Dozens of businesses, clubs, and entertainment venues dotted the area.
So they were in high school, but they couldn't get into the clubs, but they wanted to. They wanted to listen and jam, and their teachers were there. You know, they often tell this story that the teacher was playing pool, and if you had a question, you just walk in and say, "Hey, how does this fingering go?" or "How do I?"
Baker had dreams of becoming a trombone player in the orchestra. He attended Indiana University, earning his undergraduate and graduate degrees in music education.
I thought playing the trombone, since that came easy for me, and I'd won the New Star poll in 1962, I think it was. And I thought, boy, I'm on my way. But a higher power said, not that way, though.
Baker was playing with the George Russell Sextet in the late 1950s when a jaw injury forced him to abandon the trombone. He tried switching to the piano.
So for 1 year, I practiced piano 8 hours a day, only to discover that piano was an unforgiving instrument and it wanted nothing to do with me. I played bass for about a year or 2 years, and my band teacher, Russell Brown, said to me, "David, that instrument's not going to challenge you enough." So he went out to a pawn shop and bought a $15 cello and put it together and gave me the cello. And I, jokingly, of course, until the day he died, I would say, "Mr. Brown, how could you do that to me? You said I was one of your favorite students, and you would start me on cello at 34 years old."
Baker liked to laugh and tell that story, but ultimately he said everything that happened was God's way of putting him on the path he needed to be on. Not long after switching to the cello, Baker got a call from the dean of Indiana University's School of Music, inviting him to come back to his alma mater and start a jazz studies program.
4, 5, 6.
He told stories and often about how he was in meetings and people just shut the door and said, you know, "We don't want this jazz in here." It was kind of looked down upon, meaning, can you really teach that? Can you evaluate it? Do they learn as much as in other academic settings? So he sort of had to prove to the classical oriented academia that this is possible. And also, he was the only black faculty at that time, so that's a big challenge.
Baker would have to prove himself and prove that jazz could be taught in an academic setting.
He answered the question, what is the study of jazz? By saying, it's about style and about repertoire. It's not about your technical handling of the instrument. Therefore, all the jazz majors can be taught by the classical teachers. And that's one of the main decisions, strategic decisions that he made that put it comfortably within a school in which you would have thought there'd be headwinds to create such a program.
Baker developed a curriculum and a way to test it. And Baker developed a deep connection with his students.
Before that, it was very much an oral tradition. You know, it's more the mentorship type. I'll show you how it goes and you copy it off one-on-one. But this made it possible to be taught anywhere, all over the world.
And Baker developed a deep connection with his students.
He was ever encouraging, ever encouraging. They felt supported by him in everything they did. And I think you can see, and we'll see now in the weeks ahead, remembrances by the students that will outline moments in their life where they doubted themselves. And then David then would get them back into believing in themselves. And if he could be there, he would be there. Because for him, it was about showing up.
His environment at Indiana University gave him the opportunity to learn not only from his students, but also his colleagues, who in many cases were the best in the world on their particular instruments. His first commission came from famed violinist Joseph Gingold. Soon, Janos Starker followed, Jim Campbell, Harvey Phillips, and the Bozart Trio. His colleague, Menachem Pressler, used a movement from Baker's Boogie Woogie Piano Trio Roots 2 in his classical concerts. Baker's career was marked by the seamlessness with which he blended jazz and classical elements, and by his prolific rate of composition. More than 2,000 works commissioned by more than 500 individuals and ensembles, ranging from the New York Philharmonic to the African-American a cappella group, the Fisk Jubilee Singers. Baker was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize in 1973 and a few years later for a Grammy. Baker's legacy will continue to live on worldwide, not just through generations of prominent working musicians, but also in all of those who continue to use his materials to learn how to teach jazz. For Indiana News Desk, I'm Sarah Whitmire.
Baker is survived by his wife, Lyda, a flautist with whom he recorded many times, one daughter and a granddaughter.